Well, our next guest heads one of Germany's biggest employers. Deutsche Post is the world's biggest transporter of air and sea freight by volume. It carries 5% of global trade, yet it's aiming to outpace market growth over the next 5 years as its logistics and express operations expand. Joining me now is the Chief Executive Officer, Frank Appel. Thank you so much for coming in the studio with us. Now, we were talking during the break about this news on Volkswagen. You are not in negotiations with any of your labor unions, but is this going to mean that there's going to be more inflation in Germany overall? Because even if you're not in negotiations, other German companies will be.
Yeah, I think, first of all, overall, one of the successes of Germany has been that we had moderate salary increases in the last decade. And I think the joint target of unions and employers have to be that we keep that somehow, so that we are not just to be excited because we had one great year last year, that we remain reasonable on both ends. And that will avoid inflation on one end and will fuel somehow growth for the country. So, I think that's the target for employers as well as unions.
Just to add to the fact that Europe is a very difficult business condition in general, and that's just going to get worse. I know you're focusing a lot on the emerging markets. Are we going to see a double-dip recession in Europe?
I don't think so. I'm a little bit concerned that we have too many optimistic people globally, and that is always, not such a good sign, because, we have seen when too many optimists around, the opposite happens. It has calmed down a little bit, and therefore I'm slightly optimistic that we see a good 2011.
So what are you saying? Just you have to be very cautious, and how does that reflect on your plan to do business, for example, in the emerging markets, especially in China?
I think as a manager of a global company, you have to do two things. You need a long-term perspective and look into the long-term trends, and they have not changed. Global trading will continue, globalization will continue, but you have to remain prepared for short-term volatility, because volatility has increased in the last years massively, and therefore you have to prepare the company for both. For long-term perspective on one end, where you want to go, what you do, where you invest, how you invest, but also flexibility on the short end.
But again, this volatility would be in Europe because we're seeing possible inflation. We're seeing the ECB also having to maybe raise rates before they're ready. How does that scare you as a CEO?
I think we will see volatility everywhere around the world. We have seen volatility as well in Asia, in China. Volumes were significantly down in comparison to what we have seen before. Now they are up again in the US as well. So I don't see that Europe is worse position. I think the European Union is taking the right stand to reduce their state deficits and working on that, because that's needed. You can only spend the money you have earned before. That's true for a company, but that's also true for countries.
What about acquisitions? If you want to move to the emerging markets, there may be cheap deals out there. Are you looking at anything, or do you have the cash to buy them?
We are in a very lucky position that we have cash, but we don't to buy companies, because we have a very good platform already. In the emerging markets, we are in all our businesses market leader, so we can really now focus on organic growth. But nevertheless, if you want to invest in these fast-growing markets, you need some investments as well. But overall, we don't need to make any major acquisitions.
But what's your biggest concern for this year? Are you going to see a little bit of pressure on margins because people actually want to ship for less, because we're still in certain parts of the world, if not most parts of the world, in a recession?
I'm not really concerned about this year for our company, but what the internal focus has to be, how we anticipate, more flexibility in our operations. That's the key, and we have not found all answers yet, and that's something we have to work on. Beyond that, it's all about growth. It's about simplification of our processes to really fuel organic expansion of our business.
What about the U.S. economy? Because you've had some concerns there, and some of your operations, I believe, were streamlined.
Yeah, that's all behind us. We have done that very successfully. Now we see healthy growth in all our business units. We have still a huge operation in the U.S. That's all behind us. We are now really geared up for having growth in all regions of the world.
Mr. Appel, I wanted to ask you a little bit about screening, because we've had concerns over the last 6-7 months about a lot of the package being used for terrorist activity. How will that impact your business? Do you have to do a lot more screening now than you did just a year or 2 years ago?
First of all, air freight security is a key item on our activity list every day. You know, we are the people who are shipping that material, so therefore our employees are very cautious. I think it's important that we find smart answers to the problem. You can't screen everything, and it's not needed either, but you have to find smart processes, information sharing between governments and companies so that you identify certain issues. You know, we have done that for years and decades in difficult countries, and I think that is the work we have to do together with the government.
Frank Appel, thank you so much, the CEO there of Deutsche Post.